The ballroom at Lancaster House was a sea of glittering sharks, and Evelyn Thorne was drowning. She was a nobody, a poor relation, a shadow. When her cruel cousin, Isabella, cornered her with a Viscount known for his wandering hands, Aveline panicked. She fled, not towards the doors, but towards the heavy velvet curtains of an alcove, desperate for even a moment's invisibility. She plunged into the darkness and struck something solid as marble. A pair of steel-grey eyes glittered in the gloom. "Hiding," a cold voice drawled, "is a poor strategy, Miss Thorne." She had vanished from the party and walked straight into the arms of Alistair Vane, the cold, untouchable Duke of St. Jude. The London season of 1823 was, by all accounts, a suffocating spectacle. And for Aveline Thorne, it was a special kind of hell. She was a ghost at the feast, a poor relation, the unpaid companion and living shadow to her cousin, the beautiful but viciously ambitious Isabella Pembroke. Aveline's existence was one of quiet servitude, fetching shawls, repairing torn lace, and worst of all, absorbing the sly, cutting remarks of her aunt, Lady Pembroke. Tonight, the crush at Lancaster House was unbearable. The heat from 1,000 candles and 500 bodies made the air thick as soup. Aveline, clad in a predictable, dove-grey muslin, the colour of invisibility, pressed herself into the corner of the ballroom, her eyes not on the dancers, but on the ceiling. Such remarkable plasterwork, she thought, her mind drifting to the complexities of its structural support. A cantilevered miracle. But the stress on the northern arch is concerning. "Aveline, do stop muttering about the walls and make yourself useful," Isabella's voice hissed, sharp as a stiletto. Isabella was a vision in emerald silk, her dance card already full, her eyes scanning the room for the night's true prize. "I'm sorry, Isabella. What do you need?" "I need you to not look like a damp tragedy. You are wilting. It's embarrassing." Isabella's eyes narrowed. "Worse, you are drawing unwanted attention." Aveline followed her gaze, and her blood ran cold. Lord Barnaby, a man of 50 years with a wet-lipped smile and a reputation for patronizing young ladies, was ambling toward them. He was a Viscount, and therefore, in Lady Pembroke's eyes, a potential fallback for Isabella, but a perfect practice for Aveline. "Oh, look," Isabella said with a cruel, bright smile. "Lord Barnaby fancies a chat. Do try to be charming, Aveline. It's the least you can do for the roof over your head." Lord Barnaby was only feet away, his piggy eyes appraising her. "My dear Miss Thorne, a rose hiding in the shadows. Allow me to bring you into the light." He reached a fleshy hand for her arm. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Aveline. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't be polite. She couldn't be touched by him. She did the only thing she could. She fled. Not to the grand entrance. That would cause a scene. Not to the ladies' retiring room. Isabella would find her. No, Aveline bolted sideways toward a deep, shadowed alcove set between two marble pillars, shielded by thick, heavy curtains of burgundy damask. She had noted it earlier as a potential sanctuary, a quiet pocket in the architectural design. She didn't slow. She gathered her grey skirts, plunged past the pillar, and thrust herself into the suffocating darkness of the velvet folds. She did not hit the wall. She hit a man. It was like running into a column of granite. Aveline gasped, a small oof of terror, and stumbled. Strong hands, moving with surprising speed, clamped onto her upper arms, steadying her before she could fall. She was trapped, pinned between the heavy curtains and a wall of unyielding, muscular broadcloth. Aveline froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was in a tiny, dark space, held firmly by a man she could not see. She could only smell him: clean linen, expensive wool, and a faint, cold scent, like winter air. She tipped her head back, her eyes adjusting to the gloom, and met a pair of the coldest, most intelligent grey eyes she had ever seen. They were not amused. They were not startled. They were simply assessing. The dim light from the ballroom beyond the velvet filtered in, illuminating a face that was all sharp angles and aristocratic disdain. Chiseled jaw, straight nose, a mouth that looked like it had never smiled. She knew this face. Every woman in London knew this face. Alistair Vane, the Duke of St. Jude. He was the season's greatest prize, impossibly wealthy, devastatingly handsome, and utterly unattainable. He was known as the Iron Duke, not for his military prowess, but for the impenetrable fortress he had built around himself. And she had just thrown herself at him like a common. "Are you quite finished, madam?" His voice was a low, velvet drawl, laced with ice. Your Grace," Aveline stammered, horrified. She tried to pull away, but his grip was like steel. "You are Miss Thorne," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Lady Pembroke's ward." His voice put a faint, almost imperceptible disdain on the word ward. Yes, I am so sorry. I was trying to—" "Vanish," the Duke supplied. His gaze flickered past her shoulder, out into the ballroom. Aveline realized he, too, had been hiding. A poor strategy. One should always know the topography of one's escape route. Aveline's panic was suddenly replaced by a flash of irritation. "It would have been a perfect strategy, Your Grace, had the alcove been unoccupied, as any reasonable person would assume." The corner of that sculpted mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, but the barest suggestion of one. "You find me unreasonable. I find you in the way." He actually chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound, as if the mechanism were rusty. "No one has ever accused me of that. At least, not to my face." "Your Grace, if you would please release me, and return you to Lord Barnaby," he murmured. "He seems eager. I believe he is currently inspecting the spot where you were standing, as if you might have left a slipper." Aveline flinched. His grip on her arms gentled, but did not release. "So," the Duke mused, his grey eyes sweeping her face, "the grey mouse has claws." "I have no claws, Your Grace. I am merely trapped." "You are," he agreed. A new, different kind of tension filled the small space. He was looking at her. Not at her, as Lord Barnaby had, but seeing her. It was almost more unnerving. "I must go," Aveline whispered. "No." The word was quiet, but absolute. "You will not. You will not give that boor the satisfaction of your fear, and you will not give your cousin the satisfaction of your ruin." Before Aveline could process this, Alistair Vane moved. He didn't just step out. He parted the curtains, one hand still lightly on her elbow, and drew her out of the alcove with him, into the full, sudden light of the ballroom. The music swelled, and then it seemed to die. Alistair Vane, the Iron Duke, who had not been seen on a dance floor in 5 years, was standing in the middle of the room, and on his arm, looking utterly terrified and bewildered, was the Pembroke's little grey mouse. Lord Barnaby froze, his face a mask of puce-coloured shock. Isabella, who was holding court by the punch bowl, dropped her fan. The Duke ignored them all. He looked down at Aveline. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice now carrying in the relative silence. "A turn about the room. The air in that corner seems rather stifled." He placed her hand firmly on his arm and began to walk, steering her directly into the centre of the most exclusive, most unforgiving room in London. Aveline had tried to vanish into the curtains and had instead become the centre of a spectacle. And as she walked, her hand trembling on the Duke of St. Jude's arm, Aveline had the sudden, terrifying realization that she had not escaped a trap. She had just walked into a much more complicated one. The carriage ride back to the Pembrokes' rented townhouse on Brook Street was a masterclass in silent fury. Isabella stared out the window, her jaw so tight Aveline feared her teeth might crack. Lady Pembroke, however, was a simmering volcano. The moment the front door closed, the eruption began. "A spectacle!" Lady Pembroke shrieked, tearing off her gloves. "You, Aveline Thorn, made a spectacle of this family, of me, throwing yourself at the Duke of St. Jude in an alcove. It's beyond shameless. It is tactical. And you did it badly." "She did it on purpose," Isabella snapped, rounding on Aveline. "She knew he was there. She has been plotting this, the little grey viper." No, I swear, Aunt, I was running from Lord Barnaby. You saw him. And you made him look a fool," Lady Pembroke countered, "which, in turn, makes us look fools for bringing you. Do you have any idea what you've done? The gossip, Aveline, the Duke and the wallflower, the Iron Duke's mouse-trap. You have made yourself a subject of ridicule, and by extension, you have sullied Isabella's prospects." I apologize," Aveline whispered, her eyes on the floor. "Apologies are worthless. You will not attend another ball. You will not leave this house. You will remain in your room until I decide what is to be done with you." Aveline fled up the servants' stairs to her small, cold attic room, the insults chasing her. She sank onto her narrow cot, but she didn't cry. Instead, she slid a loose-leafed trunk from beneath the bed. She lit a single, precious candle and opened it. Inside were not gowns or jewels, but tools, fine-nibbed pens, a bottle of India ink, a set of German drafting implements, and rolls of high-quality vellum. This was her secret. This was her inheritance. Aveline Thorn, the grey mouse, was the daughter of Geoffrey Thorn, a man who had once been called the most promising architect in England before his sudden, tragic, and mysterious fall from grace. He had died in poverty, leaving his daughter with nothing but his tools and his talent. Aveline unrolled a sheet of vellum. She closed her eyes, not seeing the ball, but the structure of Lancaster House. She began to draw. She wasn't just sketching, she was correcting. She redesigned the flawed northern arch, adding a series of hidden buttresses, creating a solution that was both structurally sound and aesthetically brilliant. This was her escape. Meanwhile, in a vast, silent library in Mayfair, the Duke of St. Jude was standing before a fire, a glass of brandy in his hand. "An eventful evening, Your Grace," his butler, Hemmings, murmured as he collected the Duke's coat. "You could say that, Hemmings. The household is abuzz. You were seen dancing." "I was seen walking, Hemmings. Do not embellish." Alistair stared into the flames. He had gone to that alcove to escape the simpering misses and their hawk-eyed mothers. He despised the season. He despised the pretense. He had built his cold reputation as a shield, a way to protect his time, his work, and his heart. Then that girl had cannoned into him. He had expected terror. He had expected simpering. He had not expected, "I find you in the way." He had not expected her eyes. When she looked at the room, she wasn't looking at the people. He'd seen her earlier. She was looking at the ceiling, like a master builder or an architect. She was an anomaly. And Alistair Vane, a man of science and logic, was fascinated by anomalies. He had saved her from Barnaby, yes. But he had also, he admitted, been curious. He wanted to see what she would do in the light. She had been terrified, But she hadn't fainted. She hadn't giggled. She had simply endured. Her small, ungloved hand on his arm had been trembling, but her back was straight. "Hemmings," Alistair said, setting his brandy down. "Find out everything you can about Miss Aveline Thorn, daughter of Geoffrey Thorn." Hemmings paused. "Geoffrey Thorn, Your Grace? The architect?" "The very one." "As you wish, Your Grace." A week passed. Aveline was a prisoner in Brook Street. She took her meals in the kitchen and spent her days reading and drawing, lost in her world of lines and angles. She was in the small, dusty library on the ground floor, ostensibly to catalogue Lady Pembroke's books, when the butler, a man who despised her, announced a visitor. "The Duke of St. Jude is here, miss. To see you." Aveline dropped the copy of Sermons on Morality. "The Duke? Here?" She scurried to the drawing room, her hands covered in dust, her hair falling from its pins. Lady Pembroke and Isabella were already there, having appeared as if by magic. Isabella was in a new mourning dress, her face a mask of predatory welcome. "Your Grace," Lady Pembroke gushed. "What an unexpected honour." Alistair Vane stood in the centre of their fussy, over-decorated room, like a wolf in a dollhouse. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black riding coat. He looked magnificent and utterly bored. He bowed. "Lady Pembroke, Miss Pembroke." His eyes scanned the room, bypassing Isabella's practised smile, and landed on Aveline, who was hovering by the door. "Miss Thorn." Your Grace," Aveline managed, curtsying. "I have come," the Duke announced to the room, "to request Miss Thorn's assistance on a matter of some urgency." Isabella's smile faltered. "Her assistance?" Lady Pembroke repeated, as if the words were foreign. "Indeed." The Duke strode past them, stopping in front of Aveline. He pulled a rolled parchment from his inner pocket. "My library at St. Jude House. The shelving is inefficient. I am told you have an eye for structure." Aveline's heart stopped. How could he know? Isabella let out a high-pitched, false laugh. "Oh, Your Grace, you jest. Aveline, she has an eye for ribbons. Yes, she is very good at ribbons. Aren't you, Aveline?" The Duke did not look at Isabella. His grey eyes were fixed on Aveline. It was a challenge. Aveline's terror was warring with a sudden, fierce surge of passion. The one thing she cared about, the one thing she was good at. He unrolled the parchment. It was a simple and deliberately flawed diagram of a library wall. "My architect insists on cantilevered shelves," the Duke said, his voice neutral. "I am skeptical." Aveline looked at the drawing. Her professional instincts, so long suppressed, roared to life. She forgot who she was. She forgot who he was. She forgot her aunt and cousin. "He's an idiot," she said. The room went deathly silent. Lady Pembroke looked as if she might faint. I beg your pardon," Aveline whispered, horrified at what she'd just said. But the Duke's eyes were gleaming. "Explain," he commanded. "Well, Your Grace," Aveline said, her voice gaining strength as she pointed to the drawing. This is all wrong. The western wall of St. Jude House is a 17th century addition. It has no deep-set foundation. You simply cannot use cantilevered shelves with that masonry. The lateral load it's a catastrophe waiting to happen. The sheer weight." She grabbed a piece of scrap paper from the secretary's desk and, with a shaking hand, picked up a pencil. "You must use a buttressed support system. Distribute the weight. Like this. See? If you channel the force down, not out, you can triple the shelf space without compromising the wall's integrity. Otherwise," she finished, her face flushed with enthusiasm, Your first editions will be your first casualties." She looked up, breathless, expecting to be dismissed, to be laughed at. Isabella was aghast. Lady Pembroke was a statue of pure horror. And the Duke of St. Jude. He was staring, not at her drawing, but at the light in her eyes. And then, the Iron Duke did the impossible. He smiled. It was a small, devastating, private smile, and it was directed only at her. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I believe you have just saved my library, and you have, I fear, made yourself indispensable." The Duke's visit, and his subsequent consultation with Aveline, was the social equivalent of a cannonball. The ton was aflame. The Iron Duke, who had rebuffed advances from the most beautiful and well-connected women in England, was spending his afternoons in the company of a nobody. Lady Pembroke, a woman who could spot a change in the wind faster than any meteorologist, performed a dizzying pivot. Aveline was not a disgrace. She was an asset. A strange, inexplicable but potentially valuable one. Aveline was moved from the attic to a proper guest room. Her grey muslin was replaced by modest, but new, day dresses. She was no longer a prisoner. She was, as Lady Pembroke put it, our dear, clever Aveline. Aveline knew it was a farce. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand. Her consultations with the Duke were, to her, intoxicating. He would send a carriage for her, and she would meet him in the vast, cold library at St. Jude House, with a paid companion, a stern but fair widow, named Mrs. Croft, sitting in the corner, knitting. They were a sham, of course. Mrs. Croft was paid by the Duke, and was deaf in one ear. Alistair would spread blueprints on the great mahogany table. "The East Wing," he'd say. "My father made a mess of it." And Aveline, her shyness forgotten, would dive in. "It's not just a mess, Your Grace. It's a structural liability. But if you were to open the ceiling here, create a 2-story atrium, you could use flying buttresses, not as support, but as a visual motif." He would watch her, his chin on his hand, as she drew, her fingers flying, her face smudged with charcoal. He wasn't just fixing his house. He was being seen, in a way. He was a man drowning in responsibility, and she was the only person who saw the structure of his life, not just the title. But their quiet, intellectual paradise was not built to last. 2 forces were now aligned against Aveline. The first was Lady Honoria Finch. If Isabella was a viper, Lady Honoria was a lioness. She was the season's reigning beauty, a woman of impeccable lineage and icy confidence, who had long considered the Duke of St. Jude her own private property. She saw Aveline not as a threat, but as an insult. The second was Isabella. Isabella's jealousy was a physical, sour thing. She had been eclipsed by her own shadow, and she would not stand for it. The 2 women, rivals in all else, found common cause. "She's a witch," Isabella whispered to Lady Honoria at a garden party at Holland House. "She's cast some kind of spell on him." "He's not bewitched, you fool," Honoria replied, her voice cutting. "He's amused. Like a man who has found a talking dog. The novelty will wear off. We must simply accelerate the process." The garden party was a lavish affair. Aveline was in attendance, not as a companion, but as a curiosity. Several people spoke to her, eager to see the Duke's architect. Aveline, overwhelmed, quickly fled the crowds, finding refuge in a secluded, overgrown corner of the grounds, a forgotten knot garden. Believing she was alone, she pulled her personal sketchbook from her reticule. It was her most treasured possession, filled with her own designs, not corrections, but creations. Fantastical castles, ideal cities, and on the most recent pages, a detailed, passionate reimagining of a ruined Gothic abbey. She was so lost in her drawing, so deep in the world she was creating on the page, that she didn't hear the footsteps on the gravel path. "It's beautiful," Aveline yelped, slamming the book shut. The Duke of St. Jude was standing over her, an unreadable expression on his face. "Your Grace, you startled me." "My apologies." He gestured to the bench. "May I?" He sat, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his formal clothing. "What is it?" he asked, nodding at the book she clutched to her chest. "Nothing, just scribbles. Follies." "I doubt that, Miss Thorne. You do not seem the follies type." He was silent for a moment. "I have another problem, Miss Thorne, a rather larger one." Your house, Your Grace?" "My ancestral home, Blackwood Abbey, in Northumberland." His voice changed. The ice was still there, but it was thinner. Underneath was something raw. "It's a ruin. My family. We have not visited in a generation. It is a place of bad memories." Aveline was captivated by his tone. "A tragedy written in stone," she whispered, thinking of her own father. His head snapped toward her. "Precisely." He looked at her, really looked at her, and was about to say more when a high-pitched shriek shattered the peace. "Ah! Aveline! Aveline! Help!" "Isabella!" Aveline shot to her feet, her sketchbook tumbling from her lap onto the bench. "Isabella, what is it?" "My ankle! I've twisted my ankle. Oh, it's dreadful. Aveline, fetch help." Isabella was sprawled dramatically on the path, her face a mask of poorly acted agony. I'll get some water," Aveline cried, and in her panic she ran toward the main house, completely forgetting the Duke, the garden, and her most precious secret, which lay open on the bench. Alistair Vane stood. He watched Aveline run. He looked at Isabella, who was already starting to recover now that Aveline was gone, and his eyes narrowed in cold contempt. Then he looked down at the bench, at the open sketchbook. He knew he shouldn't. It was a violation of her privacy. He picked it up. He was expecting sketches of flowers, perhaps portraits of her cat. He was not expecting what he saw. He froze. It was not scribbles. It was not follies. It was genius, complex elevations, cross-sections of stress-bearing walls, a detailed, brilliant redesign of a theoretical Gothic abbey, with notes in the margins in a precise, educated hand. It was a design that was both historically reverent and structurally innovative. It was perfect. It was the solution he had been seeking for Blackwood for years. He turned the pages, stunned into silence. He saw sketches of Lancaster House, of St. Jude House, all with her corrections. He saw a mind that worked just like his, only better, more beautifully. He flipped to the very last page, a new section she had just begun. At the top, in a strong, clear script, was a title: Reconstruction of Blackwood Abbey, a Study. He stared, his heart pounding in a way it never had before. Then his eyes fell to the bottom of the page. There, in the corner, was a small, almost invisible signature. A tribute, in memory of Geoffrey Thorne, architect. Alistair's blood ran cold. Geoffrey Thorne. The name was a curse in his family. The name was a ghost. He knew, in that instant, exactly who she was. He knew why her father had failed. And he knew that the ruin of Blackwood Abbey was not just a tragedy. It was a crime, and his own family were the criminals. The Duke of St. Jude did not return to the party. He took Aveline's sketchbook, walked to his carriage, and ordered his driver to St. Jude House. He spent the night in his library, the book open on his desk, a bottle of brandy at his elbow. Geoffrey Thorne. The story was a dark, unspoken stain on the Vane legacy, Alistair's father, the previous Duke, had been a man of immense pride and limited talent. He had wanted to rebuild Blackwood Abbey as his masterpiece, a monument to himself. He had hired the most brilliant young architect of the day, Geoffrey Thorn. Thorn's designs had been revolutionary, but the Duke, jealous and arrogant, had claimed them as his own. When Thorn protested, the Duke had used his immense power to have him blacklisted. He'd ruined the man's reputation, broken his contracts, and driven him into poverty. Thorn had died, penniless and disgraced, in a London debtor's prison. His wife had followed him to the grave a year later, leaving a small, orphaned daughter, Evelyn. The flawed plans Alistair had inherited, the ones he'd been trying to fix, were his father's clumsy, amateurish copies of Thorn's original genius. And now, by some miracle of fate, Geoffrey Thorn's daughter, a woman who had inherited her father's brilliant mind, had walked into his life. He looked at her designs for Blackwood. She had, with no knowledge of the past, intuitively solved the problems her father had been forced to abandon. Alistair felt a wave of cold sickness. He and his consultations had been a grotesque parody of his father's original sin. He had been using her, just as his father had used her father. He knew what he had to do. Evelyn was in a state of pure panic. She had rescued Isabella, who had made a miraculous recovery the moment Evelyn returned without the Duke. When Evelyn had rushed back to the Knot Garden, her book and the Duke were gone. She had spent a sleepless night. He had her book. He would see her secret. He would think her presumptuous, arrogant, mad. The next morning, a footman from St. Jude House arrived. He did not bear a polite note. He bore a summons. "His Grace the Duke requires your presence. Immediately. The carriage is waiting." Lady Pembroke was ecstatic. "He is going to propose. I know it. Evelyn, wear the blue silk." "He is not going to propose," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "He is going to fire me from whatever it is I am." She went. She wore her old grey dress. It felt like armour. She was shown not to the library, but to the Duke's private study. A dark, imposing, masculine room. He was standing by the window, his back to her. Her sketchbook was open on his desk. "Your Grace," she whispered. He turned. His face was terrible. It was not cold. It was haunted. "You are the daughter of Geoffrey Thorn," he said. It was not a question. Evelyn paled. He was my father. Yes. He was the true architect of Blackwood Abbey. Evelyn's world tilted. "What? No, he died of a fever. My aunt. She said he was a dreamer, that he failed, that he chased fantasies." "He did not fail," Alistair said, his voice rough. "He was destroyed." And he told her. He laid his family's sin bare. The theft, the betrayal, the blacklisting, the debtor's prison. "My father," Alistair said, his voice full of self-loathing, "stole your father's life, his legacy, and he left Blackwood Abbey, a testament to his own incompetence, a ruin. It is not a tragedy. It is a monument to my family's shame." Evelyn sank into a chair, her legs unable to hold her. Her father, a genius, not a failure. Her entire life, her identity as the daughter of a failed dreamer, was a lie. She felt a white-hot surge of anger, so pure it burned away her fear. "And you," she said, her voice shaking with this new, terrible power. "You, consulting me, on your library. Was that a joke? Were you toying with me? The architect's little girl?" "At first," Alistair said, his honesty brutal. "I was curious. I did not know, not until yesterday." He gestured to the sketchbook. "Not until I saw this." He walked to the desk. He did not touch her drawings. He pointed. Your design for the rose window, it's what he was trying to do. You finished it." The anger in Aveline's chest fractured, and a profound, aching grief flooded in. "All those years," she whispered, tears finally tracking pathways of dust on her cheeks. He was a master." "Yes," Alistair said. "He was." The silence in the room was heavy, filled with the ghosts of two families. "Why tell me?" Aveline asked, looking up, her eyes fierce. "Why not just burn my book and send me away?" "Because," Servitude stepped toward her, "I have spent 5 years and a fortune trying to fix my father's mistakes. I have been trying to restore a building. I failed. Because I did not understand that what truly needs to be restored is a legacy." He stopped, standing before her. "I am not my father, Miss Thorn." He made a proposal. It was not the one Lady Pembroke had predicted. "Forget the Pembrokes. Forget London. Come to Blackwood Abbey. Not as my consultant. Not as a guest." He took a breath. "Come as my partner. I will hire you. As Master Architect Aveline Thorn. I will pay you. I will pay you a fortune. We will tear down my father's work, and we will rebuild Blackwood from your father's original plans. We will put his name, your name, on the cornerstone." He held out his hand. "Help me right this wrong. Help me give Geoffrey Thorn the monument he deserves." Aveline looked at his outstretched hand. To accept was to align herself with the family that had destroyed hers. To refuse was to let her father's genius die a second time. She was torn. Her heart was a ruin, just like Blackwood. "I will come," she said, her voice a low, trembling whisper. "Not for you, Your Grace, and not for your money." She stood, and she did not take his hand. "I will come for him. On one condition. Name it. You will never again refer to my father as Geoffrey Thorn. You will refer to him by the title your father stole." She lifted her chin. "You will call him Master Architect Thorn." Alistair Vane looked at the small, fierce woman before him, and for the first time in his life, the Iron Duke bowed. "As he should have been," Alistair said. "And as his daughter is." Aveline's departure from the Pembroke house was not a polite exit. It was a detonation when she informed Lady Pembroke that she was leaving her employ to accept a professional commission from the Duke of St. Jude. Her aunt had first laughed, then sputtered, then turned a shade of purple that clashed violently with the wallpaper. A commission? You? A woman architect? Don't be absurd. He has compromised you. This is a sham. He is taking you to Northumberland to be his mistress." "I would rather be his mistress than your servant, Aunt," Aveline said, the words tasting like strange, liberating fire on her tongue. "But as it happens, I am to be his architect. I will be travelling with a paid companion, Mrs. Croft. My salary will be substantial. Good day." She left Lady Pembroke gaping, and Isabella's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The war had been declared. The ton was scandalized. This was beyond the pale. Lady Pembroke and Isabella, in league with the furious Lady Honoria, began their campaign. They did not have to invent lies. They simply had to spin the truth. "He's taken her to that ruin in the north. Alone, my dear. Well, with some chaperone he's paid for. He's clearly lost his mind, besotted by a common schemer. She's a doodle drawer, and he's treating her like a professional. It's an insult to our class." Lady Honoria confronted Alistair at a regatta just 2 days before his departure. She had cornered him, a vision in white lace, her beauty like a sharpened weapon. Your Grace, Alistair, you are making a laughing-stock of your name, taking that nobody, to your private estate. Think of the scandal. Think of your duty. Alistair had looked at her, his grey eyes as flat and cold as the North Sea. Lady Honoria, I am building a monument. Miss Thorne is drawing the plans. You, I believe, are drawing conclusions. I suggest you find a new hobby. Good day. He cut her dead. The journey to Blackwood Abbey was long, cold, and undertaken in a heavy, armed carriage. Mrs. Croft sat inside with Aveline, knitting silently, a bulwark of propriety. The Duke rode alongside on his black stallion, a silent, imposing guardian. They did not speak of personal matters. They spoke of stone and light and water. Aveline, holding her father's, and now her, plans, was all business. We will need to quarry stone from the East Ridge. My father's notes say it's the most stable. It will be done, Alistair replied. After 5 days they crested a hill. Alistair raised his hand, and the carriage stopped. There, he said. Aveline stepped out. It was magnificent. It was not a house. It was a carcass, a vast, skeletal ruin of a Gothic abbey perched on a cliff overlooking the roaring sea. Ivy choked the towers. The nave had no roof. It was a place of profound, tragic grandeur. It's perfect, Aveline whispered. They got to work. The first few weeks were chaos. A small army of workmen, local masons and engineers, all hired by the Duke, descended. They cleared rubble. They set up workshops. Aveline was given a vast, cold library in the one stable wing of the house to use as her studio. And Aveline transformed. The grey mouse was gone. In her place was the mistress architect. She was tireless. She was up at dawn, climbing scaffolding, in a practical modified riding habit the Duke had made for her, her sketchbook in hand. She argued with the master mason about load-bearing joints. She recalculated wind shear equations. She corrected the engineers. And she was, without exception, right. The workmen, who had at first sneered at the slip of a girl, began to regard her with a kind of awe. She wasn't just giving orders. She knew the work. She spoke their language. And Alistair, the cold Duke, was captivated. He did not interfere. He merely watched. He saw her, her face smudged with dirt, her hair escaping in a wild halo, arguing with a man twice her size, and he felt a strange, fierce pride. He found excuses to be near her. He would bring her tea in the evenings as she worked late into the night by candlelight, her fingers stained with ink. You should rest, Aveline, he'd say, his voice, when it was just them, losing its iron. I can't, she'd reply, not looking up. I've found a problem with the original plan for the West Wing footings. My father, he didn't account for the soil erosion. And you have? I will. He was no longer thawing. He was on fire for her. He was falling, desperately and completely in love. Not with a wallflower, but with the brilliant, fierce, and utterly uncompromising woman who was rebuilding his home. He had offered her a partnership to atone for his father's sins. He now realized he wanted something more. He wanted her. The cold Duke was gone. In his place was Alistair, and Alistair was a man with a singular, terrifying purpose. He had offered her a commission to save her father's legacy. Now he was terrified that, in the process, he had made it impossible for her to ever see him as anything other than the son of the man who had destroyed her family. He had made a devil's bargain, and he was beginning to fear he would be the one to pay the price. The Northumberland winter set in, hard and brutal. The work at Blackwood slowed, but it did not stop. The main structure had to be enclosed before the worst of the snows. Aveline and Alistair were trapped, in a way. The roads were often impassable. Their world shrank to the cold, cavernous and magnificent ruin, the roaring sea and the whistling wind. They fell into a rhythm. Work all day, and in the evenings they would meet in the library, with Mrs. Croft snoring softly by the fire, and they would read or talk. Alistair would read reports from his estates. Aveline would pore over her blueprints, but the silence was charged. Every brush of their hands as they passed the tea. Every time their eyes met over the table, the air crackled. One night, a storm rolled in from the sea. It was a monster. Rain lashed the windows like bullets. The wind screamed, a physical howling entity. The old ruined parts of the Abbey groaned under the pressure. Aveline was in her studio, unable to sleep. She was sketching, working on the new design for the great rose window. Her father's original design was lost. This would be hers. The door opened. Alistair stood there, silhouetted, his shirt open at the collar, his hair a mess from the wind. He looked less like a duke and more like a pirate. "You should be in the cellars," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the storm. "The East Tower. It's not safe." "I'm fine," Aveline said, not looking up. I can't get the light right." "Aveline, the storm." "I know," she snapped, frustrated. "But I see it. My father. He wanted the light to hit the altar at dawn on the solstice. But your father—" "My father," Alistair said, his voice rough as he slammed the door against the wind, "was a fool and an arrogant monster. We have established this." He crossed the room in 3 strides. He took the charcoal pencil from her hand. Their fingers touched. Aveline gasped, a small, sharp sound. He did not let go. "Aveline," he said. His voice was no longer a rumble. It was a plea. She looked up. His grey eyes were not cold. They were on fire. They were full of a desperate, raw hunger that matched the storm outside. "I am so tired of atoning," he whispered. "Alistair," she breathed. It was the first time she had used his name. He leaned in. "I did not bring you here to fix my house, Ayan. I brought you here because I could not live in a world where you were not building." He kissed her. It was not a gentle, polite, drawing-room kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of apology, of 5 years of profound loneliness and of pure, unadulterated passion. It was the storm and the foundation and the fire all at once. It was a man who had not allowed himself to feel in a decade, finally breaking. Aveline's hands, stained with ink and grit, came up to tangle in his hair. She kissed him back with all the pent-up passion of a life unlived, of a mind that had finally found its equal. The kiss was broken, not by the storm, but by a crash. It wasn't a lightning strike. It was the sound of the great library door being thrown open. A voice, dripping with malice and soaked with rain, echoed in the hall. "Well, well." "The architect, is it?" Aveline tore herself from Alistair's arms. Her face was flushed, her lips swollen. Standing in the doorway, soaked to the skin, their faces masks of triumphant fury, were 3 women: Lady Pembroke, Isabella, and Lady Honoria Finch. They were not supposed to be here. It was impossible. What are you doing here?" Aveline stammered. "We came," Lady Pembroke sneered, stepping forward, "to save his grace. We received a tip that he was being held here, against his will, bewitched by a predator. We came on a rescue mission," Isabella said, her eyes devouring the scene. Aveline's dishevelled state, the Duke's open shirt. Her smile was pure poison. "But it seems we're too late. She's finally secured her position, Lady Honoria said, her voice shaking with rage. You common thing! You have ruined him! Aveline felt the blood drain from her face. This was it. This was her ruin. She had been caught. She was a fallen woman. All her work, all her father's work. It would be for nothing, overshadowed by this one moment. She looked at Alistair, expecting she didn't know what. But Alistair Vane did not look ashamed. He did not look caught. He looked furious. He did not let go of Aveline's hand. He simply pulled her to his side, placing her slightly behind him. He was no longer Alistair. He was St. Jude. "Ladies," he said, his voice so cold it seemed to freeze the rain in the air. "You have travelled a long way on a fool's errand. You are trespassing." "We are here," Lady Honoria said, stepping forward, "to expose this creature for what she is, a fortune hunter." Alistair Vane did something Aveline had never seen him do. He laughed. It was a cold, terrifying, mirthless sound that was louder than the wind. "A fortune hunter? You think she is hunting my fortune?" He shook his head, the laugh dying. "Ladies, let me correct your limited assumptions. Aveline Thorn," he said, his voice booming in the hall, "is not here for my fortune. She is here to reclaim her own. The one my father stole from her father. The one you are not fit to even comprehend." He pointed to the blueprints on the table. This is the work of Master Architect Geoffrey Thorn and his daughter, Master Architect Aveline Thorn. They are the masters of Blackwood. I am merely the custodian." He turned then and looked at Aveline. His eyes, in front of their enemies, were soft. "I kissed her. That is true, and God help me, I will do so again and again, and I will spend the rest of my life earning the right to do so." He turned back to the three shocked, dripping women. "You came here to witness a scandal. You shall have one, but it is not hers. It is yours." "Mrs. Croft," he bellowed. The chaperone, who had been asleep in her room, appeared, looking grim. "Your Grace, please show these ladies to the stables. Their horses will need to be rested." Isabella gaped. "The stables? In this storm? You can't." "The roads are washed out," Alistair said, his voice flat. "You will spend the night there. You will leave at first light. And if I ever see your faces at my gates again, I will have you arrested. Not for trespassing. For stupidity." "You will be ruined, St. Jude," Lady Honoria shrieked. "We will tell everyone." "Please do," Alistair said, turning his back on them. "Tell them all. Tell them that the Iron Duke has finally thawed. Tell them that he has found his architect." He turned to Aveline, who was staring at him, her eyes wide. He took her face in his hands, ignoring the sputtering women being escorted out. "I meant every word, Aveline." Did you mean the part about kissing me again?" she whispered, shaking. "I did," he said, and he did. The three harpies, as the staff at Blackwood immediately dubbed them, were sent away in the mud and disgrace of the following dawn. The story they tried to tell in London, of a duke bewitched and a harlot triumphant, was so warped, so spiteful, that it collapsed under its own malice. The real story, as it turned out, was far more interesting. Alistair and Aveline, in one brilliant, unified move, returned to London. But not for the season. They held a press conference, or the 1823 equivalent. They invited the editors of the Times, the Morning Post, and, most importantly, the Journal of Architecture. In the grand and now structurally sound Library of St. Jude House, Alistair Vane, the Duke of St. Jude, stood before the most powerful men in London. And he confessed. He confessed his father's sins. He laid bare the story of Geoffrey Thorne producing the original stolen plans. And then he introduced the woman standing beside him. "This," he said, "is Master Architect Aveline Thorne, daughter of Geoffrey Thorne, and the true genius who is rebuilding Blackwood Abbey. I am merely her patron, and, if she will have me, her husband." The ton was rocked to its core. This was not a scandal of sex. This was a scandal of justice. Aveline Thorne, the grey mouse, became the most famous woman in England overnight. She wasn't the Duke's mistress. She was his equal. Lady Pembroke and Isabella, they were ruined. Their lies were exposed. They were laughed out of London, their social climbing game so spectacularly lost that they retreated to a damp cottage in Wales, never to be heard from again. Lady Honoria, she married Lord Barnaby. It was considered a fitting end. 1 year later. The scene is a grand party, but not in London. It is at the new Blackwood Abbey. It is a masterpiece. It is not a house. It is a symphony of stone and light. Aveline Thorne Vane, the Duchess of St. Jude, stands in the centre of the great hall. She is not in grey. She is in a gown of deep, vibrant blue, the colour of the sea at dusk. She is not hiding. She is the centre of the room, surrounded by artists, writers, engineers, and a few, very select, nobles. The sun is setting. It is the winter solstice, and as the last rays of sun hit the horizon, the light streams through the great rose window, her rose window, and hits the altar in a starburst of ruby, sapphire, and gold. The room gasps. Alistair, her husband, comes to her side. He is no longer the Iron Duke. His eyes, when they look at her, are filled with a warmth that rivals the fireplace. He hands her a glass of champagne. "It's perfect, my love," he whispers, kissing her temple. "Not quite," Aveline says, a small smile playing on her lips. She takes his hand and leads him to the main entrance. She points up. There, carved into the great stone lintel above the massive oak doors, is the new, permanent dedication. It does not say Vane. It reads, "Blackwood Abbey restored Anno Domini, 1824 from the designs of Master Architect Geoffrey Thorne and Master Architect Aveline Thorne Vane, Duchess of St. Jude." He traces the letters of her father's name, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You put your father's name first," he says, his voice thick. Aveline leans her head on his shoulder, looking out at the home they built. "As it should have been," she replies. He turns her and kisses her, not with the desperation of the storm, but with the deep, abiding, and structurally sound peace of a man who has finally, after a lifetime of cold, come home. The woman he'd found hiding in the curtains had not just rebuilt his house. She had rebuilt him. And so, the woman who tried to vanish became the most seen woman in England, the Duchess of St. Jude. Aveline and Alistair didn't just rebuild Blackwood Abbey. They built a new life, founded on truth and a love as solid as the stone walls she had designed. Their story proves that the coldest hearts can hold the most warmth, and that true worth is never found in a title or where you hide. It's found in the courage to show the world who you truly are. Thank you for listening to this full-length story. If Aveline and Alistair's journey from the shadows to the light touched your heart, please don't let this video vanish. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own hidden worth, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more historical dramas that will sweep you off your feet. We have new stories coming every week, and we can't wait to share them with you. We'll see you in the next one.